There is an investment strategy that has never failed. Not in the last 20 years. Not in the last 50. Not once in the entire post-World War II era. It has outperformed tech stocks, real estate, bonds, and cryptocurrency across every market cycle and every economic condition. The strategy requires no insider knowledge, no special access, and no financial expertise. You do not need a broker. You do not need a hedge fund. All you need to do is watch the news and buy defense stocks the moment a war begins, every single time. Now ask yourself why that works. Ask yourself why the most reliable financial signal in the history of modern investing is a bomb going off somewhere on Earth. And then ask yourself whether the people who understand that signal better than anyone, the people who are positioned before the market moves, before the contracts are signed, before the first soldier crosses a border, whether those people have any financial interest in making sure that wars begin and that they continue for as long as possible. That is the question this documentary is going to answer. And the answer is going to change how you read every headline about every conflict for the rest of your life. Marcus Henderson was a Marine sergeant. He did 2 tours in Fallujah, one of the most violent urban combat environments American forces have operated in since Vietnam. He came home in 2007 with a traumatic brain injury that he could not fully explain to people who had not been there. He spent the next 3 years navigating a VA system so underfunded and overwhelmed that it took nearly 1,000 days for his disability claim to be approved. In that time, he lost his marriage, his apartment, and briefly his sense of whether he wanted to keep going at all. In those same years, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, the company that manufactured the aircraft, the missiles, and the weapons systems used in the conflict Marcus had fought in, received total compensation averaging over $20 million annually. Lockheed's stock rose more than 60% during that same period. Marcus Henderson and that CEO were both products of the same war. One of them nearly destroyed by it. One of them made extraordinarily wealthy by it. And here's the thing that the financial records make impossible to ignore. That gap was not an accident. It was a system working exactly as it was designed to work. But the real story is even more shocking than this. Because to understand how that system was built, you have to go back to the man who first tried to warn us about it. And the fact that this warning came from a 5-star general is what makes it so devastating. January 17th, 1961. Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in World War II, the man who planned the Normandy invasion, the man who had seen more of what war actually costs than almost any human being alive, delivered his farewell address to the American people. He could have talked about anything. He chose to talk about this. He warned the country about what he called the military-industrial complex, a permanent, structural alliance between the defense industry and the federal government that, in his words, was something the American people had never encountered before. And he said, with the full authority of a man who had spent his life in uniform, that the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power existed and would persist. He said this 60 years ago. He was describing what we have right now. Because between 2001 and 2021, the United States spent an estimated $8 trillion on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. $8 trillion that traveled through the federal defense budget and into the accounts of a small, concentrated group of private companies. In 2020 alone, the top 5 American defense contractors received a combined $166 billion in government contracts. $166 billion in a single year, paid by taxpayers, collected by shareholders. And this is where the story takes a genuinely dangerous turn. In 2003, a company called Halliburton received a contract to provide logistical support for the Iraq War, not through competitive bidding, through a no-bid contract, meaning Halliburton was selected without competition, in secret, to do work that eventually grew to nearly $40 billion. The man who had been Halliburton's CEO was D. Cheney, who was, at the time these contracts were awarded, the Vice President of the United States. Cheney had sold his shares before taking office and has always denied direct involvement in the contract award. But the financial record does not require anyone's admission. In the 5 years following the invasion, Halliburton's revenue more than doubled. Their stock price climbed over 200%. The war was the single greatest financial event in the company's history. Was this a coincidence? Was this just good timing? Or was something else at work? Here is what the lobbying disclosures reveal. In the decade following September 11th, 2001, the top American defense contractors spent more than $1 billion lobbying the United States Congress. $1 billion invested in the political relationships that determine which conflicts get funded, how long those conflicts continue, and which corporations receive the contracts that sustain them. The same companies collecting taxpayer money to fight wars were spending a portion of that taxpayer money to influence the political decisions that created and extended those wars. That is not a money trail. That is a closed loop. And the question it raises, the one that should disturb every voter in every democracy on Earth, is whether any government that depends this heavily on defense industry money can ever be fully trusted to choose peace when peace is available. And the loop runs even deeper than the lobbying numbers suggest. Because between the Pentagon and the defense industry runs what Washington insiders call the revolving door. A 2018 report found that in a single year, more than 380 former senior government officials moved directly from Defense Department positions into jobs at the top 25 defense contractors. 380 people, carrying security clearances, institutional relationships, and classified knowledge of future procurement decisions, carrying all of that directly into the private sector. They are not breaking the law. They are the law, and the law was written to accommodate them. But even this is not the final layer. Because beyond the contractors, beyond the lobbyists, beyond the revolving door, there exists a shadow war economy that operates in the spaces between official policy and international law. And it is worth, by conservative estimates, more than $500 billion every year. Victor Bout spent decades building a private air freight network that delivered weapons to conflicts across 4 continents. He supplied rebel groups, governments under international arms embargoes, and militia organizations in wars that the official weapons market was legally prohibited from serving. For every shipment Bout brokered, there was a manufacturer who built the weapons, a bank that processed the payment, an insurance company that covered the cargo, and a government somewhere that looked the other way because the outcome served a strategic interest. Bout was convicted in 2012. He has since been released. The network he represented, the financial ecosystem of unofficial war, continues. Which brings us to the revelation that makes everything else in this story land differently. The question we started with was who profits when countries fight? And by now the answer is clear. Defense contractors, arms dealers, lobbyists, political insiders, and the shareholders of companies whose quarterly earnings reports read like battlefield maps. But the deeper answer, the one that cannot be unlearned, is not about who profits. It is about what profit does to the decision. When the people with the power to start a war, sustain a war, or end a war have a financial stake in its continuation, the question of when that war ends is no longer a military question. It is no longer a political question. It is a financial question. And financial questions are governed by financial logic, which means conflicts end when the money runs out, not when the mission is completed, not when the soldiers come home, not when the civilians stop dying, when the return on investment declines. Eisenhower understood this in 1961 and spent the last minutes of his presidency trying to tell the American people. He had devoted his life to military service. He understood what honor in uniform looked like. And he also understood that honor and profit do not always travel in the same direction, and that when they diverge, money has a way of outlasting everything else. Marcus Henderson waited 3 years for his benefits. $8 trillion passed through the system that sent him to war. 380 officials walked through the revolving door. $1 billion in lobbying shaped the political decisions that determined how long he stayed. The war economy does not operate in the shadows. It operates in public filings, congressional records, lobbying disclosures, and quarterly earnings calls. Every piece of it is documented. Every number is real. The only thing missing is the attention it deserves. And the only question that remains is whether enough people will start paying it before the next stock price climbs on the morning after the next invasion begins.